At one point, Yellowman was one of the biggest stars of reggae. However, in recent years, both industry insiders and fans have watched him degenerate into a shadow of himself with less music and appearances. The big question is, what happened to him? Why the change? In this video, we'll reveal to you the real story behind what really happened to Yellowman. Yellowman was born Winston Foster on January 15, 1956 in Negril, Jamaica. His arrival into the world came with challenges most children never face. He was born with albinism, a condition that would shape much of his childhood and the way society treated him. In Jamaica at that time, albinism was widely misunderstood, stigmatized, and associated with superstition. For young Winston, this meant a childhood characterized by rejection, ridicule, and loneliness long before he ever stepped on a stage. From the very beginning, Yellowman's life was defined by absence and hardship. His mother abandoned him when he was still an infant, and he never knew his father. With no immediate family to raise him, he was sent to the Maxfield Park Children's Home in Kingston. The orphanage became both his refuge and his prison, a place where he had shelter, but also a place where his difference was painfully visible. Among the other children, his pale skin stood out like a spotlight, and he quickly became a target for bullying. Growing up albino in Jamaica during the 1960s was a harsh experience. Kids at the orphanage mocked him with cruel nicknames, calling him Doopy, Ghost, or White Boy, words meant to strip him of belonging. Adults, too, usually treated him with suspicion. In a culture deeply steeped in myths and folklore, people with albinism were sometimes seen as cursed or unlucky. This constant stigma left Winston feeling like an outsider, even among outsiders, a boy who had no home and no acceptance. Amidst these difficulties, he found music, and it became his escape. The orphanage was not a place of luxury, but it was a place where sound carried, the rhythms of ska, rocksteady, and reggae floated from radios, and music seeped into Winston's consciousness. Over time, he discovered that his voice could get attention in positive ways his appearance could not. When he sang, people stopped mocking, even if only for a moment. Singing gave him a power he otherwise lacked. It was the first time he felt he could command respect. Education at the children's home was basic, but Yellowman showed a sharp mind. Yet his peers and even teachers often overlooked him because of his condition. Many assumed he wouldn't amount to much. Doctors even told him that his albinism and related health issues would shorten his life dramatically. He was told he might not live past his teenage years. Hearing such predictions as a child planted a grim seed. Winston grew up believing he was living on borrowed time. Instead of breaking him, though, this belief pushed him to embrace life with urgency. By his teenage years, Winston had developed a deep love for Jamaican sound system culture. Kingston was alive with music, massive speakers, local DJs, and selectors blasting the latest hits at street dances. Young Winston would sneak out of the children's home to attend these events, drawn to the energy and the possibility of expression. He saw DJs commanding crowds with their voices, creating laughter, excitement, and unity through rhyme and rhythm. That stage power was something he craved. Still, the discrimination followed him wherever he went. Outside the orphanage, people mocked his appearance. Women often rejected him because of his skin, and society dismissed him as someone who could not succeed in life. But by then, Winston had begun to discover the resilience that would later define him. He refused to let the cruelty of others silence him. Instead, he turned their words into fuel for his ambition. Music slowly became more than just an escape. It became his mission. By the late 1970s, Yellowman had started entering small competitions, testing his ability against other young performers. One of the most outstanding moments came when he competed in the Tasty Talent Contest, Jamaica's most famous showcase for rising musicians. Against all odds, and despite the stigma of his albinism, Yellowman didn't just hold his own, he won. That victory proved to him, and to the many who doubted him, that talent could break through prejudice. It was the beginning of his transformation from orphan to artist. But even after winning recognition, the struggles did not simply vanish. Industry insiders were hesitant to back him, uncertain whether audiences would embrace an albino DJ. Many still viewed him as a novelty act, rather than a serious contender. Yet Yellowman's sharp wit, charisma, and lyrical skill forced people to listen. He leaned into humor and self-deprecation, often making jokes about his albinism before others could. It became part of his persona. He took the very thing used to shame him and turned it into his armor. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Jamaica's music scene was shifting. Roots reggae had given way to a harder, faster sound known as dancehall, and sound system culture was exploding across the island. It was the perfect environment for Yellowman's style. He quickly became a staple on the biggest sound systems, especially Aces International, where he honed his craft battling other DJs. His stage presence was unmatched. He was fearless with the microphone, able to freestyle endlessly, and he had a gift for connecting with audiences no matter how tough the crowd. By the early 1980s, Yellowman was everywhere. His breakout came with the hit Zungu 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 Zung, a song as playful as it was infectious, built around a simple but unforgettable hook. The track became a cultural phenomenon in Jamaica and later influenced hip-hop artists in the United States. Songs like Nobody Move, Nobody Get Hurt, and Operation Ratification further solidified his reputation as dancehall's new king. What made Yellowman so captivating was not just his lyrical skill, but his attitude. He flipped the narrative of ridicule into one of empowerment. Instead of hiding from the jokes about his albinism, he made them part of his act. He would walk on stage, joke about his appearance before anyone else could, and then proceed to deliver a set so electrifying that audiences couldn't help but admire him. He turned what had once been his greatest weakness into his greatest weapon. International recognition soon followed. By the mid-1980s, Yellowman was touring Europe, the United States, and Japan. He signed with Columbia Records, a major milestone that took dancehall beyond Jamaica's shores. For the first time, the world saw an albino Jamaican not as an outcast, but as a superstar. His energetic shows, often featuring outrageous outfits and raw, unapologetic lyrics, made him unforgettable. At his peak, Yellowman was hailed as the king of dancehall. He had broken barriers no one thought possible, becoming the first dancehall artist to achieve global stardom. For an orphan once told he would never live past childhood, it was a victory beyond imagination. Yet behind the success, challenges loomed on the horizon, challenges that would test Yellowman's resilience in ways even harsher than his childhood years. And it was these challenges that messed with his career, leaving fans in the unknown. In 1986, Yellowman received news that forever changed his life. Doctors told him he had cancer of the jaw and skin, a condition tied to his albinism. For years, he had been warned that his health was fragile, but this diagnosis was a devastating blow. Worse still, doctors told him bluntly that he didn't have long to live. Some even gave him only 6 months. Imagine the weight of that. A man who had finally broken free from ridicule, who had fought to earn his place on the stage, suddenly being told his time was almost up. At first, Yellowman did what he had always done. He fought back with courage. But the disease was relentless. He underwent multiple surgeries to remove cancerous tissue, surgeries so invasive that they disfigured parts of his face. For a performer whose charisma and confidence came not just from his voice, but also from his ability to hold the crowd's gaze, the physical changes were heartbreaking. Fans who once saw a vibrant, energetic star now began to get worried about his appearance. While critics and commentators speculated he had undergone a plastic surgery that went wrong, some others simply made jokes out of his appearance. In all these, what nobody knew was they all looked at a man struggling with a life-threatening illness that has drastically affected his once powerful frame. The surgeries left him with visible scars and changes in his facial structure. On stage, he tried to perform with the same energy he used to, but his body could no longer keep up with the demands of his early days. The image of the larger-than-life Yellowman was fading, and in its place was a man fighting desperately just to stay alive. The emotional toll was just as heavy as the physical one. Yellowman, who had built his persona on confidence and humor, now battled depression and insecurity. He admitted later in interviews that he always felt like giving up. Once celebrated as a celeb, he now found himself whispered about with pity. The very people who had once cheered for him began to look away uncomfortably, unsure how to react to his transformation. Financially, the battle drained him as well. Medical treatments were costly, and long hospital stays kept him off the stage. In an industry as unforgiving as music, absence quickly translates into irrelevance. While he was fighting for his life, new artists were rising, and dancehall was moving forward without him. Shabba Ranks, Supercat, and others began to take the spotlight, and Yellowman, who had once been the face of the genre, was being pushed into the shadows. The cruelest part of his struggle was that it wasn't just about illness, it was about identity. Yellowman had already spent a lifetime being judged for his appearance. He had finally turned that weakness into strength, only to have his face altered again, this time by disease. He could not joke away cancer. He could not charm his way past the scars. For someone who had fought so hard to be seen as more than his skin, this new battle felt like life mocking him all over again. As the years went on, Yellowman lived with the constant fear that every day might be his last. He survived not just one, but 2 major cancer diagnoses, enduring treatments that left him weak and exhausted. He slowly started disappearing from the mainstream spotlight, his name rarely mentioned in the same breath as the rising stars of reggae and dancehall. The world that once celebrated him now seemed to have moved on. Yet even in this pitiful chapter, there was a haunting dignity. Yellowman refused to fully disappear. Despite the disfigurement, despite the failing health, despite the whispers, he continued to perform whenever he could. He took smaller shows, community events, and festivals where loyal fans still wanted to see him. His voice was weaker, his body slower, but his spirit was unbroken. Watching him on stage in those years was both inspiring and heartbreaking to people who knew his battles. Inspiring because he refused to quit. Heartbreaking because it was clear he was a shadow of the giant he once had been. The once flamboyant superstar, dressed in colorful suits and exuding confidence, was now often seen frail, quiet, and more reserved. His life off stage reflected the struggles too. Money no longer flowed the way it once did. Medical bills piled up, and the lavish lifestyle that came with fame was gone. He lived more modestly, his superstar days behind him. The most tragic part of Yellowman's turning point was the silence that followed. The industry that had once celebrated him as its king offered little support when he needed it most. Younger fans knew his name only vaguely, if at all. To many, he became a sad story, a what happened to conversation piece rather than the legend he truly was. Still, those who had witnessed his glory years never forgot. To them, seeing him weakened was almost unbearable, like watching a lion grow old and frail. But Yellowman himself usually reminded people that survival itself was a kind of victory. The doctors had given him 6 months to live back in 1986, yet here he was, years later, still standing, even if standing shakily. His story at this stage sounds pathetic, yes, but also deeply human. He was no longer the indestructible king of dancehall, but he was still Winston Foster, the orphan who refused to be broken. Currently, he resides in Kingston, Jamaica, in a modest home far removed from the glitter and chaos of his superstar days. The walls of his living room are lined with old posters, faded images of him in bright suits, grinning wide, standing before roaring crowds. They stand as both trophies and ghosts, reminders of a time when his name commanded stadiums and his voice defined an era. Now, life is quieter. The scars from his surgeries remain etched across his face, permanent evidence of a battle fought long ago. Time has not softened them. Where once he commanded attention with sheer energy, now he lives with the heavy stillness of someone who has seen his body transformed by illness. He covers the scars when he can, but they are there, staring back at him in the mirror every morning. For years, people whispered about what happened to him. These days, he doesn't bother answering. His face tells the story. Music is still in his blood, but it no longer flows with the same urgency. Performances are fewer, smaller, quieter. Instead of massive international tours, he appears at select reggae festivals, often leaning on the Sagittarius band to keep the fire alive. On stage, the old spark sometimes flickers. The sharp humor, the wit, the chants that made him a legend. But afterward, when the lights dim and the applause fades, fatigue clings to him like a heavy coat. Age and illness have slowed him. Financially, the years have not been kind. The riches of his peak are long gone, consumed by hospital bills, changing industry tides, and the natural decline that comes with fame's fleeting nature. He lives more humbly now. Gone are the flashy cars and constant media attention. In their place are simpler routines: a walk in the morning sun, a quiet meal, the occasional visit from family or close friends. Yet there is dignity in his survival. Doctors once told him he wouldn't live to see his 40s, but here he is, still standing decades later. Every sunrise feels like proof of his defiance. He takes pride in that, even on days when his body feels weak. Yellowman's life today is a mixture of triumph and tragedy. Triumph in the sense that he has lived beyond every expectation. Tragedy in that the world mostly remembers him for who he was, not who he is. In Kingston, he is not just a musician, but a survivor. One whose very existence defies time, illness, and the cruelty of fate. The king of dancehall still breathes, still speaks, still sings, even if his voice carries a little softer now. Let's know your thoughts in the comments section. Subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, like and share.